Sean. Yeah.
Awesome. It's really good to have you guys. Thank you so much for coming. We have our weekly Tuesday night free mind and body skills group. And tonight I'm going to be talking to you about healing our wounded inner child. Okay, and that's a pretty big topic, bigger than most people really kind of realize. A lot of people don't even realize that they have a wounded inner child, or that they even have an inner child inside them. So we have it says Claudette Newland entered the waiting room. Okay, should I admit? I'm going to admit.
I admitted her already. Somehow her internet is just showing as drowning. So you don't worry. I'll take care of the waiting room.
Up on my screen. Okay. All right. So we just have a quote here by Joy Bell C. It says, when you feel a child inside of you springing to life, that's how you know you're where you should be. Sometimes that child isn't the happiest little child. So sometimes we got to figure out why. So what is the inner child? Has anyone here not heard of an inner child? Has everyone here heard of an inner child, or is there some people that don't know what an inner child is? Toyin, have you heard of an inner child?
No.
Really?
That's my first time of hearing. Yeah.
Okay, and you might not be the only one, and that's totally fine. And that's why I'm here. I'm here to tell you what the inner child is, and to help you recognize your inner child, and even kind of communicate with your inner child. See what that inner child wants. Because a lot of times our inner child tries to communicate to us, and we don't even realize. So I'm here to kind of teach you how to recognize the voice of that inner child, and to see what he or she wants, and to tend to that inner child, so that when that child is healthy and healed, that means we're healthy and healed for the most part, spiritually, emotionally. So the term, the inner child, was coined by psychotherapist Carl Jung, whom you guys may have heard of, you may not have. He was the student of psychotherapist Freud. Dr. Freud, remember Dr. Freud? What was his first name again? Sigmund Freud, who was quite famous. He came up with psychotherapy and psychoanalysis, which are two kind of branches of psychology. And Carl Jung came up with the idea of the inner child, and he described it as a sub-personality that lived in our unconscious mind. Okay, so the inner child is centered around safety, security, and community. And by community, I mean like family, like some would say like our tribe. Do you guys know what I mean? Like our tribe, like who do we belong to? What group do we belong to? Like our inner child really craves a sense of belonging. So when our inner child is wounded as a result of emotional trauma, neglect, abandonment, or abuse that we may have sustained while we were children, we can develop unhealthy behaviors that we think make us feel safe at the time, So these behaviors are learned. They were learned based on how we were trying to make ourselves feel safe or secure at the time, when we were very hurt as children. So those learned behaviors aren't necessarily healthy behaviors, and we might have carried these behaviors into adulthood, and we may still perform these behaviors in certain situations, and that's not always good. Unfortunately, the things that usually cause a wounded inner child come from the internalized behaviors of a wounded inner child in the caregiver. So I hope you guys know what I mean. It's kind of like a nasty cycle of like intergenerational trauma that keeps going until it is broken through healing. And that's the only way to kind of break that cycle. Some of these damaging behaviors directed towards a child by the caregiver include these things here: abandonment, shaming, teasing, manipulating, betraying, invalidating, or conditional love. Does everyone know what conditional love means, or is there anyone that would like me to explain what conditional love means? What about you, Crystal? Do you have an idea of what conditional love means? Are you there, Chris?
I'm here. Sorry, I was trying to get my thing to unmute. Hello,
Oh.
back to conditional love is loving without judgment, loving without haste, loving without compromise. It's giving, a person support even if they may be falling off a path.
Yeah, I mean, you have the right idea, but I think you're thinking of unconditional love. So conditional love would be the opposite of that, wouldn't it?
Sorry.
Yeah. I know you got it. I know what you meant.
My apologies. I don't know why I seen unconditional, but I guess that's what's always in my brain, is to always have that unconditional love,
Yeah, I know. Yeah, exactly. And it's very important for children to have unconditional love, because to put conditions on your, a child love for a child who is supposed to be in this world so dependent on their caregivers, is really kind of very abusive and very controlling, and it's a very toxic kind of behavior. So now you've got a bit of an idea of what kind of symptoms, I guess, or causes, that things that would cause a wounded inner child in someone, in children, and then they grow up with this kind of inner child still wounded if they haven't healed it properly, and that's what we're going to work through. So the wounded inner child fears rejection and abandonment. So all of these things here, if I go back one slide, all of these things on the list here cause a child to fear rejection and abandonment. And I'll go through a little bit about that in a second. First, I'm just going to say that in order to break this cycle of trauma and heal, we must recognize these behavior patterns, both as they were demonstrated to us while we were children by our caregivers, as well as recognizing those which we may have carried into our adulthood and perhaps demonstrate in our own lives. It may not be aimed towards our own children, even, it may be, but in other ways, it may also be how we deal emotionally in other situations in our lives, like with our friends, with our partners maybe, or even our colleagues. So we really have to kind of be aware of our behavior. And that, because being aware of our outward behavior in certain situations and in certain relationships and friendships, that's the first step towards healing. So how do we break this toxic cycle and heal our wounded inner child? So I did mention that it may manifest, are those behaviors that come from the hurt inner child inside of us, may manifest in other areas of our lives. It's just important to recognize those. So how do we recognize our own wounded inner child? Like, how do we know that we have a child inside us that is hurting, that may be hurting since we were a child, since we were hurt as children? So here, I have a list of possible symptoms of a wounded inner child. And sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes those symptoms can manifest differently in men and women. So there's generally like a wounded masculine child that may manifest in an adult male, and then similarly there might be a wounded feminine child that may manifest in certain behaviors in an adult female. So I'm just gonna ask you guys to look at this list here and just see if there's anything here that you recognize in yourself. Like, I know there's quite a number of these things, especially on the right side, that I can recognize in myself and that I need to work on myself. So what do we have here? We have a lack of trust. Now, obviously, all the things that are on the left can also manifest for females as well, and vice versa. So it's not, but it's just a generalized kind of male versus female kind of behavior symptoms that we can look at. So we've got lack of trust. We've got domination, like having a very dominating or controlling personality that can manifest. And all of these come from a fear of rejection or a fear of abandonment. And that's that little child inside of us screaming out, saying, don't leave me, don't leave me. So sometimes physical or emotional withdrawal or abandonment from a caregiver when we're children can cause us, or can cause a child, to be in constant anxiety, knowing that they're dependent on their caregiver for survival, right? So like, you understand like how, like, imagine yourselves as children. How would you feel thinking that your caregiver, like, is giving you the cold shoulder because maybe you didn't behave in a certain way or didn't do a certain task that you were asked to do? So your caregiver gives you the cold shoulder and doesn't speak to you for 3 days. How do you think that would feel scary? What about you, Stephanie? Do you think that would feel scary?
Yes.
Yeah.
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 I think so.
I think so too. Like, that would scare me. I would be scared that my caregiver might leave me. So, let's see, what could, that's like a kind of we need our caregiver, as children, we need our caregivers to survive. So that's a really scary thing, thinking that our caregivers are not going to be there for us, because children can't survive on their own, right? So then we have, how about manipulative? That's a very, so when children have a manipulative caregiver, that's a very toxic behavior that can make a child feel very used, like they don't have any kind of value in themselves, and their value is like kind of outside of themselves, like they're being used by their caregiver because they're being manipulated. So they feel used, and they feel like they're more of a commodity than someone who deserves to have unconditional love. And manipulative behavior can be easily learned by a child too, and this child can then take that behavior into adulthood, and these habits are hard to break, and then they end up manipulating people around them and not really even knowing how not to. Do you guys know what I mean? Like,
just to add to that point, I think that children learn manipulation at a very young age, and the famous saying of a child is innocent, which means that they always tell the truth, they're always authentic and honest, which is not necessarily the case, because they are learning those bad behaviors from parents because of their childhood traumas. Yeah. So you see younger and younger that children, even in the school system, the children in your community, they do have a way of being able to manipulate things to work for them. They've learned that very young.
Yeah, exactly. Like children pick up behaviors so quickly. They're like little sponges. What behaviors are directed towards them, they soak it up and they think that's how they're supposed to act because the adults are acting in that way. So they begin to not only learn those behaviors, but demonstrate those behaviors too. And then they take them with them as they grow, and it's all they know. It's so hard sometimes with some behaviors, depending on their past, if it was very traumatic, it's so hard to break out of those behaviors. You're right, Crystal.
A great example of that is the movie. There's a scene in Jaws where I can't the Brody, the sheriff, he's sitting at his table and his son is sitting at the table, and as he's doing things, the son is mimicking things. So it's a great example of showing how children really do mimic their parents, where they, especially if they're a parent that they idolize or look up to because of prestige or whatever they have, they tend to look at everything that parent does, whether it's a good behavior or a bad behavior, and mimic that parent because they idolize them. Or in my situation, I looked at how things were done in my family with my own parents and decided to do the complete opposite, which isn't always the best scenario either. You have to try to find that happy medium. And if you're broken, you're never going to find that.
Right, exactly. There has to be a balance, and that's part of the healing, is finding that balance too, because you're right. Thank you for pointing that out, Crystal, is that because in very extreme cases where a child has undergone trauma or abuse, from what I've observed around me, my friends, acquaintances, it's like they can either go two ways. One way, they can exactly turn out the way that their abuser was, and then they will demonstrate that behavior on the people around them as well. Or like you, they'll go in the complete opposite direction. So like you say, the part of the healing journey is just trying to find that balance. Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Crystal. Yeah. So what else have we got here? Aggression is very much a symptom of a wounded inner child. It can manifest in the masculine or in the feminine, either way. And I feel like that comes from, well, I mean, all of these pretty much come from that fear of rejection or abandonment. Yeah, so I mean, and conditional love is toxic, and it reminds me of manipulation as well. Like conditional love is kind of very similar to manipulation. It is very manipulative. It's like, I will love you if you behave in a certain way, or if you do da 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 da. Like you have to be a model of the perfect child, and then I'll love you. Like, no. That's not how to be a parent or a caregiver or interact with children at all. Like, so, but it's for someone who was shown conditional love as a child, it's hard for them to recognize that it's not right. So, but, yeah, so what else? Let's go to the next slide. So how do we heal our wounded inner child? Once we can recognize that sometimes our outward behaviors are a manifestation of a wounded child inside of us, we can become more and more aware of what that little child is trying to say and what they want. Relationships can be the biggest triggers of certain behaviors that are learned responses to situations that, you know, these situations that may have been traumatic for us when we were young. So recognizing this behavior and the reason why we do it can allow us to begin to address this child inside of us. Because as I said at the beginning of the workshop, this child wants to feel safe. They want to feel secure, validated, and they want to have a sense of belonging. So some of the things that you can do to nurture and begin to heal your inner child is just acknowledge him or her. Acknowledge that there is kind of, it's more like an energy, but like it's called an inner child, but it's kind of like an energy. We have an energy inside of us that is very childlike. And that energy was kind of created when we were young, and it's stayed with us. So acknowledge that energy and acknowledge that hurt little child inside of you. Speak to her, validate him or her, soothe him or her, reassure them that everything is going to be okay. Tell them that they are loved and tell them that they are enough. Okay, so make them feel safe because that's what they want. And I guess finally, the best way to nurture your little inner child is to do what you love to do. Do what makes you happy. Do what gives you joy, and make time in your life to do these things. It could be anything. It could be, there's a woman here, she's playing the violin. So that's great. Like it could be playing an instrument. It could be listening to music. It could be doing art, playing a sport, going for a walk, going to the gym, whatever it is that gives you joy and makes your heart go, yes, like this is good, makes me feel good, then make time in your life on a regular basis as much as you can to do these things. And some of you might say, oh, I'm so busy. I'm working full time. I have a family. I have kids to take care of. I'm in school. I'm too busy to do art. I don't have time to do art. But that's the time that you really, I'm sorry, but I think you should try your hardest to make a little bit of time in your life to do art. If art is that what you want to do, what makes you happy, if that's art or whatever it is, please, I urge you guys just to make a little bit of time, no matter how busy you are, because that, like, is doing what you love to do is the best way you can nurture your inner child. Myself, I love to do art. That's why I'm like art. Like I love to do art and I love to go for walks too. So I've been trying to, and I didn't do it for about 3 years while I was, and it was like before we started school together. And then while I was in school, I didn't really do it. I hadn't done it for about 3 years. And then I started doing it again, like a couple of months ago, I guess. And I gotta say, I forgot how happy it made me feel. Over the 3 years that I didn't do it, I forgot how happy it made me feel. So even though I'm super busy now, I try and make time for that. Even if it's not very long, like, maybe a few minutes a day or a few minutes, like 20 minutes a week, even if you can. Make some time for it in your week. Yeah. Stephanie, you love to read. That's great. Like make time for it. And I'm really happy that you have. And some people don't know what they like. And if they haven't decided or discovered what it is that gives them joy, then experiment, try different things until you find something that really makes you happy. All right. And yeah, and Sean, you love training in the gym. That's awesome. You too, Amina. What do you like to do, Toyin?
I like traveling. I like meeting people. I enjoy traveling so much.
Okay, yeah, that's awesome. And Sofika said she likes to cook. That's great, guys. I'm so happy that you guys have an interest. How about Angela Newman? Are you there? Are you able to say what you like to do? Who else we got? Sean, you like to go to the gym. Swain?
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry, I'm here. I couldn't get my thing open.
Okay,
Yes,
no problem.
I love to talk to people.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's really wonderful. Really good to hear that you guys have interest. Yeah, I think I got everyone now, and that's great that you guys have at least one interest that make you happy, because that's the best way you can nurture and heal your inner child. So And that's it for today I have for you guys. So I appreciate you guys coming. Thank you so much. Sharon, you made it. Hi, Sharon.